It is 2026, and if you feel like you are working harder just to stay in the same place, the data suggests you are not imagining it. Between rising medical costs, persistent housing inflation, and a shifting job market where automation is quietly displacing middle management roles, the financial strategies that worked for the previous generation are producing noticeably different results for this one. Most people find themselves inside a cycle that feels difficult to escape. Earning income, directing it toward bills and obligations, and arriving at the following month with little structural progress to show for it. What this video offers is not a shortcut and not a promise. It is a complete, systematic personal finance roadmap built specifically for the economic conditions of 2026. Over the next 14 minutes, we will walk through how to accurately understand your current financial position, how to build a budget that functions automatically, how to eliminate high-interest debt methodically, how to build a safety net that earns while it protects you, and how to begin investing in a way that is evidence-based and sustainable over time. We will also cover the updated IRS contribution limits for 2026, how AI-powered tools are changing the mechanics of personal budgeting, and a simple decision-making filter at the end of this video that can meaningfully reduce impulsive financial decisions. The goal is not transformation overnight. The goal is a clearer understanding of the system and a first step taken with intention. You cannot navigate toward a destination without first knowing your starting position, and yet this is the step that most people avoid because an honest look at their numbers feels uncomfortable. The discomfort is worth it. In 2026, 3 numbers should form the foundation of your financial awareness: your net income, your total yearly expenses, and whether the difference between those 2 numbers is positive or negative. The reason we measure expenses annually rather than monthly is that monthly snapshots systematically miss the irregular costs that quietly erode financial progress: the annual insurance renewal, the holiday spending period, the unexpected car repair, the summer trip that appeared in the budget as a single-month anomaly but represented a structural pattern of spending. When you subtract your total yearly income from your total yearly expenses and arrive at a negative number, that is not a budgeting failure in isolation. It is a structural income deficit, and it requires a structural response rather than incremental willpower. The second number worth understanding is your net worth, the total of everything you own minus the total of everything you owe. Your savings, your investments, and any property you hold are assets. Your credit card balances, student loans, car loans, and mortgage represent liabilities. The gap between those 2 figures is your net worth, and it is a more honest measure of financial health than income alone. Income determines your current lifestyle. Net worth determines your long-term options. Before moving forward, it is worth spending a few minutes identifying what might be called your money personality, the behavioral tendencies that shape how you naturally relate to spending and saving. Some people are oriented primarily towards security and stability, preferring to minimize exposure and build reserves. Others are oriented toward experiences and social engagement, finding genuine value in spending that creates memories and connection. Neither tendency is wrong, but a financial plan that ignores your natural orientation will produce resistance and eventual abandonment. The most effective financial plan is one you can actually maintain, which means it must be honest about who you are, not just mathematically correct on a spreadsheet. Budgeting is not fundamentally about restriction. It is about intentional allocation, deciding in advance where your money goes rather than discovering after the fact where it went. The simplest structural framework for thinking about allocation is the 50-30-20 model, which divides take-home income into 3 broad categories. 50% is directed toward needs, the non-negotiable expenses that sustain daily functioning: housing, groceries, essential transportation, utilities, and basic insurance. 30% is allocated toward wants, the discretionary spending that contributes to quality of life: dining, entertainment, hobbies, and lifestyle choices. The remaining 20% is directed toward your financial future: savings, investments, and accelerated debt repayment. It is worth acknowledging that in many high-cost urban environments in 2026, housing alone can pressure the needs category significantly beyond 50%, which means the framework requires adjustment rather than rigid application. The percentages are a useful starting orientation, not a universal prescription. If your housing costs consume 60% of your income, the honest response is to examine whether geographic, living arrangement, or income adjustments are available, not to compress every other category to zero in pursuit of a number that doesn't fit your reality. Where 2026 meaningfully changes the practical mechanics of budgeting is in the availability of AI-powered tools that automate the tedious work of transaction categorization. You can now upload a month of bank statements into an AI-assisted financial tool and receive a complete categorized breakdown of your spending within minutes, separating fixed costs from discretionary spending, identifying recurring subscriptions, and highlighting patterns that manual review would likely miss. This doesn't replace financial judgment, but it dramatically reduces the friction that causes most people to abandon budgeting in the first few weeks. The second mechanical shift worth implementing is the use of separated spending containers, sometimes called pots or sub-accounts within your banking application. When your income arrives, an automated allocation rule moves your fixed bill money into a dedicated container before you have the opportunity to spend it on something else. The psychological principle here is straightforward. Money that is not visibly available is money that is not spent impulsively. Designing your system so that the right allocations happen automatically removes the decision from the zone of daily willpower, where fatigue and present bias consistently undermine long-term intention. Building a financially stable future becomes structurally difficult when high-interest debt is continuously drawing down your cash flow. Credit card interest rates in 2026 are frequently above 25% annually, which means debt carried on those instruments compounds faster than most conventional investment vehicles can grow. Eliminating high-interest debt, therefore, is not simply a financial obligation, it is one of the highest return financial actions available to most people at this income level. There are two evidence-supported approaches to debt elimination. The first is the debt avalanche method, which ranks all outstanding debts by interest rate and directs surplus payment toward the highest rate debt first, while maintaining minimum payments on all others. When the highest rate debt is eliminated, that payment is redirected toward the next highest, and the process continues. This approach minimizes total interest paid over the repayment period and is mathematically the most efficient path to debt freedom. The second approach is the debt snowball method, which ranks debts by outstanding balance rather than interest rate and eliminates the smallest balance first. The mathematical efficiency is lower, but the behavioral effect is meaningful. Eliminating a debt entirely produces a measurable psychological sense of progress that sustains motivation through a longer repayment journey. Research in behavioral finance consistently shows that motivation and consistency are significant variables in financial outcomes, which means the approach that keeps you engaged may outperform the theoretically optimal approach that you abandon after 3 months. If you're carrying high-interest balances and your credit profile qualifies, a 0% balance transfer card can provide a temporary window during which interest stops accumulating, allowing you to direct full payments toward reducing principal. This is a tactical tool, not a structural solution. The window closes, and the underlying spending patterns that created the debt require examination regardless of which repayment strategy you choose.
An emergency fund is not a conservative financial choice in opposition to investing. It is a prerequisite for financial stability that prevents the kind of high-interest emergency borrowing that can set back years of careful progress in a single unexpected month. The general guidance is to build a reserve covering between 3 and 12 months of essential living expenses, with the appropriate target depending on the stability and replaceability of your income source. In 2026, there is a meaningful distinction between where you hold this reserve. A standard savings account at a major retail bank currently offers interest returns that are negligible in real terms. High-yield savings accounts, offered by many online banks and financial institutions, are currently providing annual percentage yields that are substantially higher, in some cases more than 10 times the national average for standard savings accounts. Verify current rates directly with providers, as these figures shift with monetary policy, but the structural principle holds. Your emergency fund should be earning while it waits, not sitting in an account that erodes its value against inflation. If building a full emergency reserve feels distant, the practical starting point is a consistent, automated monthly contribution, even a modest amount, treated as a non-negotiable fixed expense rather than a discretionary saving decision. The compounding effect of consistent small contributions over 12 months is more significant than the compounding effect of occasional large contributions made only when surplus happens to exist. Once high-interest debt has been eliminated and at least 1 month of emergency reserves is in place, the conditions exist to begin building long-term investment positions. The foundational principle of evidence-based investing for the non-specialist is that complexity is not a proxy for performance. The majority of actively managed investment funds, where professional managers attempt to outperform the market through selective stock picking, underperform simple index fund strategies over the long term after fees are accounted for. A low-cost index fund tracking a broad market index such as the S&P 500 provides diversified exposure to a large cross-section of the economy, charges minimal management fees, and requires no active monitoring or decision-making beyond regular contributions. Academic and industry research consistently shows that this approach outperforms the majority of active management strategies over sufficiently long time horizons. For 2026, the IRS has updated contribution limits that are worth incorporating into your planning. The 401k contribution limit has increased to $24,500 annually. The IRA contribution limit is now $7,500. For individuals aged 50 and above, catch-up contribution provisions allow additional amounts beyond these limits. Consult current IRS guidance or a qualified financial advisor to confirm the exact figures applicable to your situation. The most important variable in long-term investment outcomes is time in the market rather than timing the market. Historical data on U.S. equity markets shows that investors who maintained positions for periods of 20 years or longer faced a dramatically reduced probability of net loss compared to shorter holding periods. The practical implication is that beginning to invest with consistent, modest contributions at the earliest opportunity and maintaining those contributions through market fluctuations has historically produced more favorable outcomes than waiting for ideal conditions that rarely present themselves cleanly. As income grows, one of the most consistent patterns in personal finance is that lifestyle expenses grow proportionally or faster. This dynamic, known as lifestyle inflation, means that income increases that should accelerate wealth building instead produce a more expensive version of the same financial position. The awareness required here is not self-denial, but intentionality. When income increases, a deliberate allocation decision about where that additional income goes produces fundamentally different long-term outcomes than allowing it to flow automatically into elevated spending. Transportation represents one of the most significant wealth-draining expense categories for middle-income earners, largely because vehicle purchases are frequently financed in ways that extend the payment period and maximize the total cost. A practical structural guideline for vehicle purchases is to put at least 20% down, finance for no more than 4 years, and ensure that total transportation costs remain below 10% of monthly take-home income. These are not arbitrary constraints. They reflect the threshold at which transportation costs begin to materially crowd out savings and investment capacity. The rent versus buy decision deserves more nuanced analysis than the cultural default toward homeownership suggests. Purchasing property involves significant transaction costs, legal fees, property taxes, insurance, and the broadly accepted maintenance guideline of setting aside approximately 1% of the home's value annually for repairs and upkeep. In high-cost markets and for individuals with high near-term geographic flexibility, renting can preserve financial optionality and reduce fixed cost burden in ways that accelerate overall net worth growth. The right answer depends entirely on your specific cost environment, income stability, and 10-year trajectory, not on which choice carries more social approval. The common thread across everything covered in this video is that financial outcomes are produced by systems, not by isolated decisions made under pressure. A budget that runs automatically, a debt repayment plan that follows a clear sequence, an emergency fund that earns while it waits, and an investment contribution that happens before discretionary spending is considered. These are the structural components of a financial system that works continuously, rather than depending on sustained willpower and perfect judgment. One practical decision-making filter worth adding to that system is what might be called the purchase confirmation rule. Before making a significant discretionary purchase, ask whether you could comfortably afford to make that same purchase twice at the same price. If the answer is no, if the idea of spending twice that amount creates genuine financial discomfort, that is useful information about whether the purchase is aligned with your actual financial position rather than the financial position you are projecting. This is not a rule that eliminates all considered spending. It is a filter that slows the impulse purchases that consistently undermine otherwise well-constructed financial plans. The roadmap is not complicated. Understand your numbers honestly, build a system that allocates automatically, eliminate high-cost debt systematically, protect yourself with a reserve that earns, invest consistently with a long time horizon, and design decision filters that slow the behavioral patterns that erode progress. None of these steps requires financial sophistication. All of them require consistency applied over time, which is ultimately the variable that separates financial outcomes more reliably than income level, market timing, or investment selection. This video is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional financial advice. Tax contribution limits and savings rates referenced reflect available information as of early 2026 and are subject to change. Always verify current figures directly with the IRS or relevant financial institutions and consult a certified financial advisor before making investment or tax decisions. Subscribe for more videos.